When a clinical study falls apart, we tend to blame the math. But the truth is, most research doesn't fail during final data analysis. The failure happens much earlier. It happens at the very genesis of the project, hidden within the formulation of the research question itself. A vague or poorly defined question acts like a virus in the system. It quietly forces a weak study design, compromises your data collection, and ruins your statistical planning. If the question is unclear, no amount of complex data manipulation can rescue the project. Conversely, a structurally precise question acts as armor. It dictates your population, your variables, and your timeline, protecting the entire architecture of your clinical project. In our previous lecture, we covered how to move from a raw clinical observation to identifying a specific gap in the current literature. A literature gap identifies what is missing from the evidence. The research question dictates the exact actionable blueprint for uncovering it. Before we apply any complex acronyms or methodological frameworks, every research idea must first survive 3 baseline tests of viability. First, the inquiry must be explicitly focused. This means it targets one singular primary outcome, rather than a scattered wish list of 5 different clinical goals stuffed into a single project. Second, the question must be practically answerable in the real world. You must be able to execute it relying only on realistic data access, feasible timeframes, and the clinical skills available to your team. Third, the inquiry must be genuinely worth answering. It should address a relevant clinical problem that helps patients or systems, rather than existing merely to satisfy academic curiosity. A question might be scientifically fascinating, like measuring 5-year global survival rates, but if it's impossible to execute, it's useless to your project. If a clinical idea lacks focus, feasibility, or relevance, no amount of methodological framing or statistical modeling will make it publishable. Transitioning an idea to a publishable protocol requires sorting your inquiry into the correct framework. Clinical research is not uniform. Forcing an observational study into an interventional framework breaks the design before drafting the protocol. You must match the tool to the objective. We start with PICOT. This is the strict framework required specifically when you are testing an active intervention or running a comparative clinical trial. Let's look at a typical idea from the ward. Does early movement help ICU patients? It sounds reasonable, but it is far too broad to test. We refine it by building out the acronym. P stands for population. We need to define exactly who these patients are. Critically ill adults, strictly receiving mechanical ventilation. I is the intervention. We replace the vague term early movement with a precise clinical action, mobilization within 48 hours of admission. C is the comparison. Without a baseline, we cannot prove effectiveness. This intervention must be weighed against usual care or delayed mobilization. O is the outcome. The word help is unmeasurable. We replace it with a hard metric, an increase in ventilator-free days. And T is the time frame. We establish a strict 28-day measurement window to observe that outcome. Now we combine them. Among critically ill adults receiving mechanical ventilation, does early mobilization within 48 hours, compared with usual care, increase ventilator-free days at 28 days? The PICOT framework acts as a mechanical filter. It removes vague clinical hopes and leaves behind a strictly measurable comparative trial. Not every study involves assigning a treatment. When you are passively observing an exposure that already exists, you need the PEO framework. Take this observational idea. Do night shift workers with type 2 diabetes have worse glucose control? We use PEO to sharpen it. P isolates the population, adults with type 2 diabetes. E isolates the exposure, long-term night shift work. O defines the outcome, glycemic control strictly measured by HbA1c. The result is clear. Among adults with type 2 diabetes, is long-term night shift work associated with poorer glycemic control as measured by HbA1c? Finally, for qualitative research investigating human barriers, perceptions, and subjective experiences, we use the SPIDER framework. The clinical observation might be, junior doctors seem exhausted during night shifts. We map it out. S is the sample, junior doctors working night shifts. PI is the phenomenon of interest, which we define as the subjective experience of burnout. Then we set the methodology. D dictates the design, semi-structured interviews. E is the evaluation of perceived causes and support needs, and R categorizes the research type as a qualitative study. This gives us our final question. How do junior doctors experience burnout during night shift work, and what workplace factors do they perceive as contributing to it? There are also highly specialized frameworks. You will use PICOS for systematic reviews, PCC to map evidence and scoping reviews, and PIRD for evaluating diagnostic accuracy. Choosing the framework based on your study's true purpose is critical. If you force observational data into an intervention framework, you guarantee that you will select the wrong study design and the next phase. Correctly matching the structural framework to the nature of your inquiry prevents fatal methodological mismatches before data collection ever begins. Structure alone is not enough. A perfectly formatted PICOT question can still be impossible to execute in a real hospital setting. Before committing months of work, you must run it through the finer stress test. The F-axis represents feasibility. You have to verify whether your specific ICU can actually recruit enough eligible patients and accurately measure the chosen outcome. I and N stand for interesting and novel. The study must add fresh value to the literature or clarify conflicting evidence, rather than just echoing established facts. E dictates the inquiry is ethical. You must confirm patient safety is protected and informed consent is achievable. Finally, R ensures the project is relevant. The final data must have a legitimate chance to influence local rehabilitation protocols or guide future trials. Finer acts as a merciless gatekeeper. It ensures your time, energy, and institutional funding are only committed to projects capable of surviving peer review. Even with a framework, review committees frequently see 4 fatal structural mistakes: combining 2 separate questions into one, using a vague outcome that cannot be measured, missing a necessary comparator, or setting a scope that is far too broad. You can apply direct methodological fixes to each of these. If you have 2 questions, split them. If the outcome is vague, define exactly how you will measure it. If the control group is missing, compare it. If the scope is impossible, narrow it to a specific setting. A perfectly formatted framework is useless if it ignores the pragmatic constraints of your available resources. Scope and feasibility always govern the final question. Now that we understand the structural rules, we can introduce artificial intelligence. Step 1. Translate your idea into a prompt. Use Perplexity to locate the gap. For verification, Semantic Scholar pinpoints foundational papers, and Consensus evaluates the evidence. Elicit extracts populations and outcomes. ResearchRabbit maps citations. Finally, Notebook LM queries disagreements across your PDFs. Executing this rapid mapping sequence ensures you understand the landscape. It prevents spending months proposing a question the literature has already answered. Prompt AI to suggest the optimal framework and draft 3 question variations: broad, focused, and highly feasible. Then, use AI defensively. Ask it to critique its own work, detect vague elements, and run a draft finer score against the variations. There is a mandatory safety boundary here. AI cannot assess your budget, verify your patient dataset, or know your ethics committee. Opening the real paper and verifying the primary source is non-negotiable. AI is highly effective at drafting the architectural blueprint of your question, but only you as the primary investigator can authorize its scientific and ethical integrity. Before you move into study design, confirm that your final question meets these criteria: clear, focused, measurable, and feasible. It must be gap-backed, ethical, and fully design-ready. To streamline this process, go to bayyinahresearch.com/resources. You can download the free question builder, the AI prompt library, and the finer scorecard. If your project requires intensive support for protocol development or ethics applications, the Bayyinah Advisory pathway is available to guide you. Finalizing a defensible, gap-backed research question takes precision. But this step is what determines the specific study design you will implement in the next phase of your research.